We'll look at God's Word. We'll finish. We're in our series here, The Miracle of Christmas. And we've been looking at different aspects of the miracle of Christmas for the last few weeks. Let me start with a story that was written a few years ago by a young college student. Some of you might have heard the story a time or two, but it's worth retelling as she emails her parents. It has now been 3 months since I left for college, and I have been remiss in writing, and I'm very sorry, she says, for my thoughtlessness in not having written until now. And I want to bring you up to date, but before you read on, Mom and Dad, sit down. Well then, I'm getting along pretty well now. The skull fracture and concussion I got when I jumped out of the window of my dormitory when it caught on fire shortly after my arrival are pretty well healed now. I only get those headaches once a day, she says. Yes, Mother and Dad, I'm pregnant. I know how much you are looking forward to being grandparents. I know you will welcome the baby and give it the love, the devotion, and the tender care you gave me when I was a child. Now that I've brought you up to date, I want to tell you there was no dormitory fire. I did not have a concussion or a skull fracture. I wasn't in the hospital. I'm not pregnant. I'm not engaged. I do not have a man in my life. However, I am getting a D in history and an F in science. And I wanted you to see those grades in their proper perspective. Your loving daughter. You see, it's not just what you say, but when you say it. It's not just when you say it, but where you say it. It's not just where you do something, but it's how you do it. The time and the place and the moment are everything. And through the Bible, through its Greek influence that Melanie mentioned this morning, we would call this Kairos time. That is, the birth of the Messiah is a Kairos moment. It is a precious moment in time. And if you think of the last 4 weeks of our series, we've looked at the miracle of the manner in which Jesus came, the miracle of the method, the miracle of the manger, and this morning, the miracle of the moment, this Kairos time. Let me try it this way on you, so backing up just a little bit. There are 2 ancient Greek words for time. One of them is the word Chronos, and the other is the word Kairos. The first, Chronos, which we still use in words like chronology and anachronism, come from the word Chronos. It refers to clock time, the time in which everything happens, in which everything can be measured. Seconds become minutes, become hours, and we would call this clock time, Chronos. When we fret about our schedules, so much of that is about clock time. It's about Father Time ticking. The time on our clocks and the hands on a march of time marches on, and we see that again and again. It is when a grandfather called his grandson on the phone and asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm sitting around getting older." And that is Chronos time. That is clock time. Chronos is quantitative. In contrast, Kairos time is qualitative. It measures moments, not minutes. Kairos moments, the time is right. The opportune time, the perfect moment, God's time. The world takes a breath, and in the pause before it exhales, the direction of human history has changed with the coming of Jesus in this Kairos time. Now, there have been God-ordained times all the way throughout history, and sometimes we might call it the right time or the appointed season. And you can see it in a passage like in the book of Ecclesiastes, and you might have heard this at a funeral or other times. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to uproot, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to tear down, and a time to build. Those are times, Kairos times, not so much Chronos times. Let me give you another illustration. In 1985, a group of black South Africans wrote a response to the crackdown of the apartheid government, and it was called the Kairos document. And in that document, it began this way: the time has come. The moment of truth has arrived. And the document conveyed a strong sense that it was time and ripe for change, and the fate of South Africa balanced on the knife's edge, and small actions have the power to change this time in history. You see, sometimes the clock keeps on ticking, Chronos, but God's time never seems to arrive. And this seemed to have happened. The people of Israel in the first century, at the time of Jesus' coming, very well might have felt this. You think of this. From the time of the close of the book of the Old Testament, the book of Malachi, it's about 450 years before the time and the coming of Jesus. So from Malachi to Matthew, there are no more Old Testament prophecies. There is a reliance on all those prophecies that had come before. And during that quote-unquote intertestamental period, it was difficult to wait for God. No prophet, no prophecies, no word from the Lord. And God's Kairos time seemed long. It even seemed late in arriving. All creation had been waiting for the Messiah, decade after decade, generation after generation, without any apparent progress. And so our passage today, I want you to read it again now in light of the Chronos and the Kairos time. Galatians 4:4 says this: "But when the set time had fully come," this is the moment, this is the right time, this is the opportune time, God sent His Son, born of a woman, born under the law. This is from Paul's letter to the Galatians, Galatians chapter 4 in verse 4. Just the right time, or the fullness of time. And so it's not insignificant when we read in our text this morning, Luke chapter 2 and verse 1, when our text that is familiar to those of us who know the Christmas story, and we either read out about it out of Matthew or out of Luke's gospel, and we read again, "In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world, that into this Chronos time comes a Kairos moment, God's time. Everyone to their own town to register, allowing the fulfillment of the prophecy. And there is this historical event in a time, in a place, in a culture, and in a condition. Let me ask the question now this way. What makes this time opportune, that is, this Kairos time, so significant? And it's one that has been pondered through the centuries, but I want us to just think about this for just a minute. Caesar Augustus had brought about Pax Romana, that is the Roman peace, from 27 BC to 180 AD, and there was peace all over the Mediterranean world. It allowed then the message of the Messiah to spread throughout the known world. It allowed for on the day of Pentecost for nations from all over the world to be there in Jerusalem. It allowed for Paul's missionary journeys to different areas of the world. The Pax Romana, the secular Roman peace, allowed the right time for the Messiah to come. Politically, the Roman Empire controlled the Mediterranean world and the civilized areas that bordered it, and it allowed safe travel and improved communication. So while Israel was taken over by the Romans, the whole known world, in one sense, was closer than it ever had been before. And the Jewish people had been dispersed throughout the Roman world. And so it was a catalyst for the Christian growth. Culturally, once Alexander had conquered the world, it became Greek in thought and language. And the Greeks had then translated the Old Testament into Greek. And our New Testament, we know, is in Greek. And in a sense, there was a saying that everyone spoke a little Greek. And it allowed for this mass communication over the known world. They could read about the Messiah and talk about the Messiah in a language they understood. Religiously, there was a belief by most people, particularly the Gentile people, in the Roman Greeks and Greek gods, but their gods, for the most part, were only local and familial and offered personal protection. And so there was a philosophical openness in the first century that had a disdain for the Roman and Greek gods, and the result of this was a religious void that allowed something that you might remember, for instance, in Acts chapter 17, where Paul goes into Athens, and he is there, and he is appealing to their reason about this God of the universe. So universal reason monotheism was strong. And then finally, I would say there was a desperation among the Jewish people. In the Jewish culture at the time was ripe, and many, resenting the foreign rule of the Romans, were waiting for the Messiah's appearance to restore their independence. And others, like the Pharisees, were longing for a Messiah who would restore a pure observance of the Torah. And so no wonder Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, it writes about Jesus, "The time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God is at hand." Did you get that? You'd have to take it. There's a lot of information to take in, but culturally, historically, politically, philosophically, and linguistically, God was waiting for just the right time to send His Son, the perfect moment, the Kairos time. Said it this way, as I was trying to summarize the essence of my message this morning. The Kairos of God made its way into our world at just the right time, slicing through Chronos with the cry of a Messiah in a manger. Now, you with me? Because we're going to think about this for just a couple of minutes in terms of our own lives. And I believe there's more application and relevancy than you might yet see. We've talked about the first century, but now you're saying, so what? What about my life? And I want you to think about it this way. Here's one thing I believe it means for us. That a life, or your life, relegated to Chronos, or Chronos time, can be downright depressing. Why? Clock time slowly kills us. It's been biting at our heels since Adam and Eve were told they would die and be kicked out of Eden. Along with that Chronos time is this certainty that you're going to die. And that there's our fear of dying that sort of underlies our very existence. Chronos time, by its lonesome, creates an anxious world. It is a fear-producing killer. And yet everything we do is marked by this steady march of time. Seconds lead to minutes, lead to hours, lead to years, lead to decades. And the problem for each of us is the clock is always running the wrong way. Did you notice? And we cannot stop it as it crawls to the next tick, tick. So we're muddling along in a career, or we're making a living, or we're just existing out of habit more than anything, or maybe the kids have now grown and are gone, and we say to myself, did I miss out on my chance? Did I make the difference? We watch as our lives, by the Chronos calculations, are cut short to accident and cancer or death, and we say, why did this happen? We say they were so young, and we say it was too early, and we lose the moments to the past, and they're out of our reach, and they're never to be regained, and we say, where did all the years go? And we focus only on the Chronos. It is truly depressing, at least in the picture I just painted. So I want to suggest to you that there's another way that we try to live in response to Chronos, and that is to constantly be your own maker of the Kairos moments. And we say to ourselves, I got to take hold of the life and the minutes and the hours that I have. And so we try to do this, and I want to suggest to you, but doing this is also narrow and exhausting way to live. And what I mean by this is we say, I got to set big goals for my life or my family. I got to plan a party. I got to have a bucket list. I got to take a trip. I got to parachute out of a plane. I got to climb a mountain. I got to take some risk. I got to be more of a risk taker. You understand that clock time is ticking, so you err by thinking you're going to be the sole maker of your Kairos moments. And we have an entire culture that's trying to live this way. You only have to look on Facebook, and you can see it again and again and again. The pictures taken, and the trip to South America, and the trip overseas, and wherever. It's just always something going to kind of create the Kairos moments. I believe there's another way. I believe the biblical way provides us with a third way. The Kairos timing of God invites you to live expectantly, to live in anticipation, knowing you can always, Gwen, trust in God's timing. And Gwen has to remind me of this, because I lose track of it pretty often, getting either caught in the Chronos or the Kairos. But we live our days looking expectantly for these inexplicable times, just like the Messiah coming, where God is with us, when in His will and His way, He intersects with our daily stuff, invigorating us and freeing us and making us hopeful. You see, I think that's what Mary did in anticipation of even carrying Jesus the Messiah. She was open to God in a way that she understood when this Kairos moment came, she wasn't going to miss it. Shocked her, surprised her, confused her, but she was receptive. It's what Simeon is doing. He's waiting in the temple for the baby to come. And Jesus is handed to him, and he praises God because he recognizes it's a Kairos moment. It's what John the Baptist does as he prepares for the Messiah, realizing this is the Kairos moment of God. See, it happened then, and it happens now as it allows us to get a glimpse of God breaking in. We actually get glimpses of how God works in the world. Not every Kairos moment is momentous. Some are quite small, but none are insignificant. All are on time, and they can happen anytime. A friend calls you out of the blue to give you a good word. Kairos moment. A child's laughter pokes through a hard day of struggle. Kairos moment. A coworker offers a word of encouragement. You see, God is always surprising if we're paying attention, but our antenna must go up in order to hear. Here's the point of the Kairos moment. The Kairos moments of God enable us to be fully alive. Isn't this what each one of us wants? To be fully alive while our heart beats. And while we're paying attention to God, it infuses each clock time with God's Kairos time. The moments allow us to live within a bigger story than ourselves. I'm telling you, your story is just too small in and of yourself. Get past it. See your life in light of the greater story. The Kairos moments alert us to the move of God in our everyday Chronos time. And what if this understanding of the Kairos moment of the manger could change the trajectory of your life as it has for countless civilizations and millions of individuals who've opened their heart to God. I would like you to know that God is not done with you, and He is not done with this world. Kyle Idleman said it this way: God is rarely early, but He is never late. And I would like you to think about that in terms of the manger. But I want to invite you to think about it in terms of your own relationship and encounters with God. Not only with the birth of His Son, but with the Sermon on the Mount or the miracles of Jesus or the cross of Christ. These are all Kairos moments. In fact, think about Romans chapter 5 and verse 6. It's a passage where Paul is describing the gospel. And notice what it says about the coming of Christ. You see, at just the right time, Kairos moment, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. So what's the challenge for us this morning? Think about this. Jesus is crying over Jerusalem in Luke chapter 19. And in verse 44, he's looking over Jerusalem, and his heart goes out, and he begins to cry. And what he says in this passage in 41 through 44 is 2 times he mentions this Kairos time, and particularly he says this in verse 44: they will dash you to the ground, meaning the people of Jerusalem are going to get squashed by the Romans, you and the children within your walls, and they will not leave one stone on another, because what? You did not recognize the time, the Kairos time of God's coming to you. They missed God's visitation. And I believe the Lord grieves over us in the same way that He wept over Jerusalem when we miss our Kairos times with Him. So here's the invitation this morning. Timing is everything. His timing is perfect. Yes, it starts with the manger, the miracle of the moment. But I want to challenge you to live expectantly, so as not to miss these Kairos moments in your life. the word of the Lord.